Welcome back to the Books Brothers podcast. I'm Garrett, and I'm here with the team.
Hello,
Rob,
and Stalin.
Today we're diving into part 2 of Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. Part 2 recaps the first 2 months of living life on the ice floe. The crew abandoned ship after the ice crushed it and ended up being another 3.5 weeks before the ship actually sank to the bottom of the Weddell Sea. This book details various crew members' personalities, from men who were scared of starving to death to others who signed up for the expedition for its scientific purposes and not prepared for wilderness survival, and how Shackleton led and managed through all of this. It also details how the men survived by hunting and killing seals to maintain their food supply. Most importantly, it detailed how they planned to survive at all. They initially attempted to hike through the floe to the edge of it with their boats to sail on open waters to the nearest inhabited island, more than 350 miles away. But because of the summer heat, the melting ice pack and unfavorable landscape made it literally impossible to pick up and move their camp anywhere. Prior to the sink shipping, the men made several trips back to the Endurance, gathered as many supplies as humanly possible, and set up camp on the floe with no end in sight to their journey and no firm plan of escape. So, with this book, there were a few parts that really stuck out to me. Chapter 5 of part 2 had a lot of really reflective and impactful comments that I wanted to hit on for today's discussion. One man journaled on the boredom and just like the lifestyle of day in and day out hunting, living on the ice floe. And he says this life, quote, has its attractions. I read somewhere that all a man needs to be happy is a full stomach and warmth, and I begin to think it is nearly true. No worries, no trains, no letters to answer, no collars to wear. But I wonder which of us would not jump at the chance to change it all tomorrow. End quote. What do you guys like? To what extent do you agree with this statement? And along with that, in what ways do you feel caught up in the current pace of your life and are missing out on life's pleasures and the more mundane parts of every day?
I mean, I can agree with what he's saying there, or what that quote is about. I got hit with this thought the other week where it was like, I want to be surprised by the ordinary. I think so many times in my life, like I go about and I do kind of the same thing every day. And so there's a lot of like monotony or repetitiveness in the things that I am doing. So I don't know, I was walking and I was just like, man, I want to be surprised by the ordinary. And so it's like, when you can look at the sun setting and you can see all the different gradients in the sky, or you know, now that we're by water, so we take a lap around part of the lake and you can see birds coming in, landing on the water, flying away. And it's just kind of amazing to watch. We also live by a airport too, but sometimes we get these like fighter jets that come by and they make these crazy loud sounds. And it's just like, stopping and looking at them and feeling like a kid. It's really cool to stop and be present to the things around you, kind of like a kid with curiosity. But otherwise, it would be like I'm going to be on my phone, or I'm going to call somebody and have AirPods in, and I'm going to miss all of these things that are happening around me that might seem like normal things that I might miss if I'm kind of living in the mundane repetitiveness of my day.
Yeah, I think that's good, Rob. I think I can relate to a lot of what you're saying about just enjoying kind of the small things. As he talked about this quote that you bring up, Garrett, I found myself as I was reading this quote thinking, kind of envying the guy writing this. I don't remember what the name of it he was. But then he gets to the very end and he's like, yeah, but we would all like leave this if we could. And I'm like, yep, I feel that too. Like I definitely get that sense of, I envy the contentment, but then also the escape kind of side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like with what Rob is saying, I think that there's a lot of times where I might like be about doing something and I might get a thought of like, oh, it would be really nice to like just go like sit over there on the ground for a long time. And I don't do it usually, never really do it, but kind of the idea of being content in a moment and enjoying a moment. And I think it's something that I've never been great at. I think I've always kind of wanted to like move on to the next thing. As you guys know, I do a lot of hiking as well as trail running. And I think you see people when they get to a peak, they just do things differently. Some people, they get to a peak and they stay there for a while. They might have lunch. They sit around. Some people, they turn around right away. I think I've always been the like turn around right away kind of person. There's maybe been just a few times in my life where I can really look back to like a hike where it was like really sitting and enjoying the moment at the top. And again, especially since I'm doing a lot of this for fitness, the goal isn't to enjoy the views at the top, but rather to get the task done. But I think there's something to be said about kind of enjoying those ordinary moments.
That was actually something I tried to press into during our hike in the Grand Canyon. As we recapped it earlier this month, just there were some times when I would get up ahead and when you all were doing your like interval gamification or whatever, I'd be like, all right, I'll wait for him to get caught up. And while I did that, I was like, let's be intentional to like sit here and look at the Grand Canyon while the sun is setting. Because I'm a very big achiever and the goal is to accomplish the hike. And I'm definitely someone who can get to the destination and turn right around. And it was really good to take those moments to just kind of drink in the view and take it in, something that I don't always do. So I can relate with that.
I think naturally I am terrible at being content. I get really uncomfortable with comfort, which I don't mean that in a good way. I'm not trying to be like a David Goggins. I mean, like, it's more of like a self-sabotage type way where like I have all that I need now, like, and what I want, and let's screw it all up somehow. Yeah, seriously. So I have to do like intentional practices to find contentment. I don't know. I have to like meditate in order to be able to sit and kind of enjoy things at a much slower pace.
I think having community with that is helpful. I don't know if you feel that way, Adam, but reflecting on things. And I think after I'd kind of shared what I'd shared, Garrett, something you said reminded me of this. Just today, I had a really light work day. Ruth was home, wasn't working today, and she was taking a nap, and Daphne was like wanting to play and stuff. So I just like went outside, and like Daphne went up and down we have this like little tiny slide, and Daphne played on the slide for like 20-30 minutes. And I would say for like the first half of it, I was very like, okay, let's see how long it takes until she's kind of like tired of this and we can like do the next thing. And I tried to, and I'm not going to say I was good at, but like just trying to like be with her like the second half. And it was much more enjoyable for me, and I would imagine much more enjoyable for her too. Can you relate to that as a parent, Garrett? Like Rob used the term kind of enjoying the ordinary. Do you feel like you struggle with that being a parent? Because I think kids, they can find such joy out of such simple things.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, I think I can't not think of Anxious Generation.
Yeah.
And other things like in my work and how we're creating content on TikTok and different consumer bases. And it's like, our attention span is shortening and shortening and shortening. And it's paradoxical, but we'll be on our phones more because we're bored. But yet what that does is it creates in us an easier ability to become bored.
Yeah.
So it actually doesn't solve any issues. So with like our boredom, we have to be comfortable with sitting and like not being entertained all the time. I feel that a lot when it comes to spending time with my kids because it's a different pace, especially when they're younger, like Daphne's age, like 1. And yeah, I try to set rules where it's like, I'm not going to be on my phone when I'm spending time with my kids and when I'm with them, because I think as we're getting older, they're playing more and more by themselves. And so like my time I'm spending with them is slowly but surely becoming less and less in a way. They go to school now and daycare. So my thought is like when I'm with them, be unbelievably present, like just present with them. Whether if they want to wrestle, let's wrestle. If they want to play a game, but yeah, I really feel it because they're very much in their creative mode where they just make up stories with their Legos and stuff, and they're like, "Dad, you be this and make a fire station with us." And it can be very hard for me to not want to like look at the college football scores or whatever while I'm playing with them because I'm like, yeah, and it's like, no, be present, and it pays off. You can't always see the ROI per se, but it's more fulfilling when you're present. But I totally feel it.
I appreciate that, though. I think it's a good encouragement.
Yeah.
One of the best compliments I've received from Sarah recently was that I'm never on my phone.
Nice.
Just like sitting out at brunch, she's like, one thing I really like about you is that you're never on your phone. It's nice. Like,
it's
yeah,
good.
It is nice.
Yeah.
It's
super good.
Nice. Just presence.
One thing I thought of when I wrote this question was my time living in China and how we took public transportation everywhere. And in the city we lived, it's one of the highest populated cities in the world. And at a minimum, you're going to spend 30 to 45 minutes going one way somewhere. And like when we went to our church, if we got there quickly, it was 45 minutes. It would take closer to an hour typically. And that sounds so long. Like, oh my gosh, that's how much time are you wasting just traveling places? But what I realized when you're spending time committed to like literally transit or commuting, you have to say no to a lot of other things. And our life was not as busy, and we had more like intentional time with our friends because it's like, hey, let's go eat dinner. Okay, we'll see you in an hour. So when you get there, that's why you're going. And we haven't gotten there yet, but as our kids get older, when we enroll them in sports and practice learning an instrument, and it just seems so easy to just get into the blocking and tackling of life and accomplishing to-do lists. And it's like, man, I kind of liked that simpler life of we only had like one or two things planned a day when we lived in China because that's all we had time for because it took so long to get anywhere. And yet I'm like, I kind of like this. And then when we moved back to the US, it's like, all right, who wouldn't just want to change it tomorrow? It's like, yeah, we just jump back into it, have something planned every night, things like that. Okay, so along similar lines, continuing in that chapter, the book, it's like a couple pages later, the book states that, quote, the men had been forced to develop a degree of self-reliance greater than they had ever imagined possible. After spending 4 hours sewing an elaborate patch on the seat of his only pair of trousers, Macklin, one of the guys, wrote, "What an ingrate I have been for such jobs when done for me at home." Greenstreet another guy, felt much of the same way after he had devoted several days to scraping and curing a piece of sealskin to re-sole his boots. He paused in the midst of his task to write in his diary, "One of the finest days we have ever had. A pleasure to be alive." End quote. So it's a somewhat similar question, but it's got some differentiators. What amenities and conveniences do you take for granted in life? And do you all think it's important to develop self-reliance when more and more things in our everyday lives, like chores, tasks, I mean, even parenting responsibilities can be outsourced? And, if you think it's important to develop self-reliance, like car maintenance is one that comes to mind. Like, why do you think that is important? And like, what areas do you need to develop self-reliance in more? So several questions there.
Well, before getting into this, Garrett, the question reminds me of when they first get on the ice, and because they're essentially stripped down of all of their materials, so they lose all their materials and they have to basically simplify everything to the chorus value. And one of the quotes in this book that I just loved is, so Shackleton is encouraging all the men. He's like, hey, you guys have to get rid of everything. I think the number was 2 pounds. They could get down to 2 pounds of weight of personal items, which is an absurd number to think about. But so anyway, so he's encouraging them to get down to 2 pounds of weight. So after he had spoken, he reached under his parka and took out a gold cigarette case and several gold sovereigns and threw them into the snow at his feet. So he literally grabbed gold and just threw it on the ground, getting rid of gold. Then he opens the Bible that was given to him by Queen Alexandra, and he ripped out the fly-leaf of the Bible that had a personal note that she wrote him. And then he also ripped out the page containing the 23rd Psalm and a page from the book of Job. The verse that was on this page was, "Out of whose womb came the ice and the hoary frost of heaven? Who hath gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen." I just love the quote just because it's here he is. They're stripping all of their basically items that remind of back of home. And here he chooses to keep just a couple pages from the Bible, 23rd Psalm, great choice there. But then a page that truly just reminds him of his situation. I mean, if you look more into the book of Job is all about Job essentially faces this big trial, huge trial in his life where the devil, Satan, tempts him, and he essentially comes out better on the other end through this trial. So I just love this because that sets the stage for how he wants his men to be, kind of to embrace this opportunity. So kind of a long intro to this, but Garrett, what you asked just reminded me of it.
I love that. Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts as well. And yeah, again, my questions are just a guide to the conversation. So I love that you took your own avenue with that. But he definitely had some Leonidas Dionysius qualities where he did all the grunt work chores like the crewmen. He wasn't above that. And then, yeah, he's like, hey, you guys need to strip down to 2 pounds, like you were saying. And here's a Bible given to me by the Queen of England and gold. And I'm putting it in the snow.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find the quote, but this really resonated with me. Just my Boy Scout. I probably looked so silly. I had 3 layers on at the start of the hike, and I had stripped down to shorts, not even a quarter mile in, and I had to carry that weight the rest of the time. And I'm like, let's be over prepared for any scenario. And he said something. He goes, I find that the people who make do with little, just to straight up survive, do better than those who pack and plan for every sort of scenario. And I'm like, gosh, that is so good.
That's the quote I thought you were going to say, Stalen. Those burdened with equipment to meet every contingency fared worse than those that had sacrificed preparedness for speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That kind of brings it back to this question that Garrett's asking. And I think I definitely feel like I take for granted things, as far as things with my home. I'm not the most handy when it comes to my home. I've never worked on my car. I'm not even at this point, not even doing my own yard, landscaping stuff. And it definitely, I think it's something that at times maybe I feel self-conscious about some of those things. I think though, in the modern world, essentially, it's when you can choose to outsource certain things, you have the ability to, it definitely feels worth it if you're, getting your time back from the places. But to go back with what Rob kind of that quote references a little bit is, but can I do what I need to do and accomplish what I need to do in these kind of scenarios? And at this point, I would say no. If I was in a crisis scenario, I don't think that I would handle it the best. And it's something to definitely think about. There's a guy that works for my company that I talked to a couple weeks back, about a month back. He lives in Asheville, and he had to leave where he lived because of the flooding and stuff, all the storms and that kind of thing. And in that conversation, he's like, hey, do you mind if I share a few things that I learned from this emergency situation? And it was really interesting. And it was something where he was like, these are things I didn't think about that good to be better prepared for. And I think it's definitely something to go through and, talk about with your family.
Yeah. So what amenities and conveniences do you take for granted in life? So I've got a couple things that came to mind when I was thinking on this. One, I'm doing the Advent season just started right now for the days leading up to Christmas. So I joined a men's group through my church, my buddy invited me. There's like 10 of us guys. So we're doing daily disciplines, like 8 daily disciplines, and we're checking in with each other from an accountability standpoint. But one of them is taking cold showers 2 days a week. So today was my first one that I had to take. And I've done this before because I did it for 3 months before I got married. But the last time I had taken a cold shower was in the month of October, and now it's December. So that cold shower hits a little different.
Yes,
I tell you
sir.
guys, no joke. I literally like rolled to work an hour later, still cold. My like circulation was still coming back. Like I tried to make it quick, but so warm water is definitely one you take for granted when you're wanting to shower, for sure. But electricity too. Like we were gonna host a party. Matt was there, like a housewarming party, and that morning our power had gone out, and so like we were like, oh my gosh, like are we gonna have to cancel the party or whatever? But just the fact that like, oh, thank goodness I parked my car outside and not in the garage so that we could like still go places, but just not being able to get like ready in the light, those types of like inconveniences we definitely take for granted. And when your car goes down too, it's like you got to rely on people for rides. Those were some of the things that I thought about, but definitely more of the handyman chore things. I hear you, Stalen. Like I know we talked about this in Mask of Masculinity, where it's like I look to some guys because they can do all these things and they can fix all these things, and that doesn't necessarily make them more man than me. But there are definitely times where it's like, man, I want to be able to fend for myself better, especially when you have people counting on you, like a wife and kids. And so, yeah, just growing in reliance so that you can carry your troop along as well.
So I want to dig into that real quick, and it's a safe space. But I think a lot of this conversation I had with a friend from crew in Springfield, and he was talking about maintaining his home and how this is like 10 years ago, which shows how what he said stuck out to me. He was talking about how he was working on his home, and his next door neighbor was a Christian guy, was like 2 generations older, like could have been his grandpa kind of age, and would encourage my friend to do his own maintenance, to fix his own cars, and talked about it. And he said, like, this is part of growing as a man. Like, it was part of your manhood, developing self-reliance, more or less. So you said, Rob, because someone can do more handyman things, that doesn't make them more of a man than me. I'm not saying you're less of a man. What I want to know, like sometimes deep down, if I'm honest though, I'm like, I feel like I kind of agree with my friend's neighbor though, where it's like Brooke, like a tense thing that we have every Christmas is I want to hang up our Christmas lights, and we could pay to have it done. But I think of my friend's neighbor's quote, and I'm like, no, I'm going to do it. I am physically able. I will be safe.
Yeah.
It will save us money. I'm going to do it. And it's like purely like a pride thing. Like I'll admit it, but it's also, maybe it's something about unique about being a man. But when I do it, I'm like, I have like so much more satisfaction when I look at the lights on my house. I'm like, I did that.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
So I'm just like, man, to what extent is like, yeah, our identity is not in what we can accomplish ultimately. But I do wonder, I'm like, should I be pressing in? Like I don't do my car maintenance anymore. I used to change the oil, stuff like that. And now I'm just like, gosh, the mechanic's right down the street. I'm like super busy with work. I got 2 kids. I want to spend my weekend with them. Not, what do you guys think?
I think, Stalen, you've hit on it. One of the reasons you don't do your lawn care is because that time to do it, you'd rather spend $25-$50, whatever it is, to pay somebody so that you can get that hour of your time back, because time has value and your time is worth more than $50 or whatever it is, because you want to spend it doing X, Y, or Z with your family, right?
Yeah.
So Garrett, I think for me, my comment around that was like kind of getting back to the mask of masculinity a little bit, where it's like if some guy can fix his car, but he goes inside and beats his wife and beats his kid, he's an alcoholic, he doesn't know the things that are going on wrong in his life. He's not a man. He's not more man than someone that doesn't do those things but can't fix his car. If anything, that guy's more of a childish yahoo, you know? So I think it comes with like just looking at it from a holistic standpoint and saying like, okay, you put two people side by side and one can't change the car oil, but the other can't. It doesn't necessarily mean that the one that can't is less of a man because he probably has other strengths that the other one doesn't, right? But I also do get what the individual is saying, like your friend, because those things, when done, they definitely do generate a sense of pride and accomplishment, and to be able to serve in that way and to provide for your family is similar as being able to go to work and bring home a paycheck and provide for your family that way. So I think when you look at it that way, they're just different ways of providing and taking care of, but one gets associated more with be a man, which we've debunked that.
Yeah. Flez, what do you think?
Yeah, I get what your neighbor is saying, but would you rather make $1 million a year and pay somebody to put up your Christmas lights, or make like $30K a year and have to do it because you're broke? I don't know. I'm just trying to think about it in a different way, because I agree with Rob. I think it's toxic. I think that it's a toxic. I hate using this word or this phrase, but I think it's a version of toxic masculinity to say that you're more of a man because you are a handyman. I think that's toxic. I think
it really has to do with how much chest hair one has. That's my understanding.
And I mean, you're gonna tell me that, you know, I could deadlift 700 pounds, but I couldn't change my own oil. But then you're gonna tell me that the dude at the car service is more of a man than me because I didn't change my oil.
Definitely, dude.
I like how you use like an also like overly toxic masculine example.
Yeah. I mean, maybe if you could do 800 pounds, you'd be more of a man. You little wimp.
I think that on that list, though, I think car mechanics ranks above weightlifting abilities.
In terms of manliness, that's so funny.
In terms of manliness, we'll have a scale. We'll develop a scale. We'll put it in the show notes.
How manly are you?
It's so funny.
Maybe because I agree with everything you guys are saying. I think sometimes it might just go back to the comfort crisis thing. Yeah, am I just trying to create a world where I just am more comfortable, and then I like take life's pleasures for granted? Because I mean we have like a house cleaner who comes once a month. It's two women actually, and they do a really good job. But it took me a long time to like mentally be okay with that, because I'm like, guys, we can clean our own toilets and vacuum our own floors, right? And with two kids, trust me, we still do that. But it's very nice knowing once a month we're going to have a full house clean, you know? And so it's like, okay, like some of it's pride in the opposite direction, where it's like, no, I can do everything. And then what I do is I just like that achiever goes on overdrive, and then I'm not fun to be around because I'm like turn into a drill sergeant. We got to do everything ourselves. So it's not like a Boy Scout merit badge of like manhood where you check certain boxes. It's more of maybe it's just like a perspective or a mentality that I think about of like, am I pressing into the discomfort? And there's some value in that, but I don't have an answer. That's why I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
I think Garrett, as you say it though, maybe it's a reminder to take inventory of, are there things that you're actively seeking? And this isn't, I mean, this question to myself and to everyone, but the things in your life that you're choosing to do that are intentionally uncomfortable, or you're doing something and you don't necessarily want to do it. And I think that if we have very minimal things like that in our life, that's probably an issue. Like there probably should be some things in our life that we don't want to do.
Yeah.
Do.
You said the do.
I take for granted, I like living in an apartment complex, I take for granted, not having to fix anything, because if something breaks, I can just call Mike, the maintenance guy. Hey,
I clogged the toilet again. Can you unclog it?
It's funny, Adam, you bring that up. Like, there's stuff that I would put under the category of house maintenance that I would not have put under the category of house maintenance before. And it's things that just seem like very simple things, but they just take time, and they're not things that are fun to do. And the example I think of is when we moved in our house, we changed out all of our light switches. And we moved in the summer. And so it was like basically turning the power off and on, our house getting very hot, and changing out light switches. And it's just, it's the little things that there's so many stupid little tasks with owning a home.
Yeah.
Fun story on the topic of calling Mike the maintenance guy. The first time in my life, 2 weeks ago when I was in LA, I had to go to the front desk on my way out as I was heading to meetings. And I'm like, hey, when you're like cleaning the rooms, can you unclog the toilet? It was so embarrassing, and I kid you,
did them dirty like that.
And I kid you not. She's like, yeah, I'll go ahead and put in like the maintenance request. Like, it wasn't under housekeeping, it was maintenance. And I kid you not, I get home at the end, or I get back at the end of the day, and there is a letter in the bathroom from the maintenance team, like, dear valued guest, we have completed your maintenance request. I was like, so embarrassing.
Or, we think you should go to the doctor because what we saw is not normal.
It was pretty embarrassing. Speaking of China, one more story on that. Clogged a toilet in China and just had to go get a plunger. That was like the only thing I needed. So I'm in this Chinese grocery store and I check out and like, no food, just a plunger. And I didn't know the Chinese word for plunger. So I was just like, xie, thank you. And just walked out with a plunger. It's like, there is only one reason why this guy is here. Oh man. All right. We're speaking of pooping in Antarctica did not sound fun. Having to wipe with ice.
Yeah, it
sounded brutal.
Bringing us back to the book here. Let's move away from poop and get back to the book. So still in chapter, I think it was 5.
Great segue.
Yeah, segueing out of defecation. When discussing the topic of leading the crew, now living on the ice, in chapter 5, the author notes that Shackleton, or quote, Shackleton was concerned of all their enemies, the cold, the ice, the sea. He feared none more than demoralization, end quote. I thought that was just fascinating and accurate. So what do you guys think it is about losing hope or faith, losing optimism in life that is so important to the human psyche and flourishing? And like, what can this teach us not just like the most extreme life-threatening circumstances that like Shackleton and his crew faced, but also in the everyday moments that we live at our jobs, with our families, etc.
I think we always think, and I don't know if it's a figure of speech or what, but we always think that things are like the end of the world. Like we say that, like, oh, this is the end of the world, or we kind of over exaggerate situations in our heads and make them be like, this is the worst thing ever. Or, like when you're going to have a tough day at work, like maybe you're getting back from vacation and you're going to be slammed, and it's like, oh, I'm going to be slammed. This is going to be the worst day ever. But like for me in those situations, it's like, suck it up. It's going to be 8-10 hours of literally sucking. But guess what? By the end of the day, I'm probably going to be caught up and everything's going to be okay. It's not life or death. And tomorrow is like the sun will rise and it'll be okay.
I think sometimes viewing the small things as being these big blown out things is really what can make that worse, kind of that almost like the spiraling. of things. And I know for me, there's been times where I've just gotten stressed out, worked up over just like stupid little things. And I think that's where it's been like helpful to have have Ruth, have a partner to, kind of reassess and recenter me on a situation. And, Rob, as you mentioned, I think having had a little more life experience now than say maybe 10 years ago, I think going through more stuff, you kind of come to these challenges with a little bit more wisdom and a little less fear. Because I think for me, it's fear a lot of times that causes lack of optimism and feeling really negative and spiraling. As you're asking this question, Garrett, I think it's a great question. It's just such a deep thing to consider. It really reminded me back to working with patients in the clinic and, working with people who've had chronic back pain, for example. So chronic back pain is it's the most common reason people call off work is back pain. It's the biggest expense of all medical expenses in America is back pain. And having worked with so many people that dealt with that, I would say at any given point, that population was probably 30-40% of the people that I was seeing were coming in for chronic. And what I mean by that is 1 year or longer back pain. And I really saw, and the research really points to this, that anytime someone has chronic pain, so pain lasting 6 months, a year or longer, there is a huge component of psychological issue component of it. And by that, I mean that there is other life factors that play a role that kind of cause this negative perception, these really just lack of hope, fear for the future. There's so many patients that come to mind when I think about this, but all these patients had unique things and challenges they're facing, but a lot of commonalities, troubled marriages, difficulty with their kids or with their parents, financial issues. And so I think that kind of the compounding effect can really, these things are contributing to their pain. And I think about that as it relates to this, just because I feel like I worked with a lot of people who just had very little hope and faith in life. And it wasn't big catastrophic events that had happened. It was usually just a series of small things.
Yeah. Interesting that having no hope can prevent healing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys think about Man's Search for Meaning at all during this?
I was wondering who was going to bring that up. I was going to say, I wish Matt was on the call because I feel like he'd bring it up. So I'm glad you joined the call, Thomas.
Yeah, me too, man. Yeah, no, I was reminded a lot by Man's Search for Meaning is a book that really delves into the psychological aspects of hope and how hope is a lot of times what keeps people alive more than any other factor in circumstances that seem impossible to survive. The fact that Shackleton's main concern here is a morale of the team, and the fact that he was so good at picking out personalities that seemed to gel together pretty well. I think that's probably key in these guys as a group kind of being able to stick it out.
Yeah.
I also think of anxiety and how in my own personal experience, I can have physical manifestations of pain or symptoms of illness or injury that I don't actually have because it's in my head, like my anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just how it's a silly analogy, but I think of the movie The Matrix, where it's if you die in the Matrix, you die for real. And the guy's the body cannot live without the mind. It's hope, the human psyche is affects everything. Anything else on this book? I mean, just wild. You have limited ammo. So it's guys, instead of shooting these seals, go up and smack them on the nose and then take your pickaxe and brain them to death. Wild. Hey, these puppies that you've been living with for a year, go around the corner, put your pistol in their jaw and shoot them. Whoa. True, we are about survival. You're eating
the
seal.
boys were built different.
Yeah.
I mean, really, just quickly note on what Thomas is saying. It does feel like they were built different. It doesn't feel like there's very many people in our world that could do this. Survive this, that is.
At first, everybody hates the cold weather and the physical hardships, but I think the mental toll after that long on the ice with nothing to do, no different things to see, having to put down your dogs, man, that would be really, really difficult.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Books Brothers podcast. Next week, we will read part 3, where Shackleton and his crew are continuing to float adrift at sea, but finally at the end take to the boats. So we'll learn about their experience continuing to survive on the ice. If you have enjoyed listening or benefited from our conversation, please subscribe, give us a review, and share with a friend that you want to connect with. Lastly, we would love to hear your thoughts. You can reach us by email at connect@booksbrotherspodcast.com or on Instagram @booksbrotherspodcast. Until next week, read, reflect, and connect.